From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
Support comes from Vision Zero. On foot or behind the wheel, safety is a shared responsibility. And Vision Zero Louisville believes 0 roadway fatalities is the only acceptable amount. Their mission is to create safe roads by design, engineering solutions, and education. More information at visionzerolouisville.org.
Welcome to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer. Louisville Public Media is celebrating 75 years of service to our community. As part of that celebration, we're sharing the stories of 75 people who've helped shape Louisville in a project called 75 and Change. Today, Laura Ellis from On Track's production team sits down with one of those changemakers, Chris Hartman, for a conversation about LGBTQ activism in Kentucky. Chris Hartman is the executive director of the Fairness Campaign, a statewide LGBTQ advocacy group.
I want to talk about what you thought was going to be your career path when you were young.
Well, first I wanted to be a paleontologist until I learned that you were dealing with bones. I wanted to deal with dinosaurs, not bones. I've always been a bit squeamish, kind of avoided dissection in science class, and became a vegetarian very early on. So paleontology didn't work out. I wasn't very good in physics, so being an astronaut didn't work out. And then, when I came out, it was theater where we all found a safety net, where all of our friends were, where all of the most accepting adults in our lives were. And so I naturally gravitated in that direction, and then got my master's in drama at Washington University in St. Louis after going to Bellarmine. And so, I wasn't certain. I thought arts administration, perhaps. I'd done a lot of Shakespeare, some improv. But all of my best theater friends at a certain point were working for Congressman Yarmouth. And I thought, what? I want to go work for Congressman Yarmouth. And I'd always, in the middle of sort of those arts endeavors, done political campaigns. My first paid political gig was just working as a canvasser on Jack Conway's 2002 congressional campaign. And then I ran a fundraising office for the DNC in Philadelphia in 2004 for the presidential election. And I would bounce back and forth because the contracts for theater, as you may know, and politics, as you may know, are about the same, short and small. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know, I definitely thought that activism would be part of whatever I would do, because a lot of my theater, a lot of my art, my performance was political. We would improv for peace during the Iraq War, those sorts of things. And the Fairness Campaign came along at a right confluence of moments in my life and maybe the life of the organization, and the rest was history at that point.
You're from Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
And where did you grow up?
Sort of around the Germantown area. St. Stephen Martyr was our home church, and that's where I went to grade school.
And because this is a Louisville-based project, I have to ask you where you went to high school.
Well, I'll make you guess.
Well, the obvious guess would be St. X.
And that's the obvious answer. It is. But yeah, it was a quarter mile from the house. And so it just made sense. It was a unique time when there was some degree of LGBTQ acceptance, or at least gay acceptance at that point, because I was definitely not the first person in my class who was out. There were several of my close friends who were out. We actually saw a degree of acceptance at that point, and I don't know that it's been that way since, and I've heard certainly not before, but, we did okay there.
There was this moment, you're right, in the late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
I think back on that time, and it's Ellen, and it's also Matthew Shepard. I don't know. I can't recall off the top of my head if they were the same year, but I think they were one after the other.
They're very close. Matthew Shepard was 98, if I recall, that we lost Matthew Shepard, of course, to that tragic and violent hate crime. And that did create a lot of activists. I think that there was, you're right, this air of we're talking about being LGBTQ in popular media more. There's a little bit more representation, and then boom. We have this defining tragedy that is so public, and so many folks connect it with Matthew Shepard. And so we see, I think, a turn towards a fiercer activism from our generation who were coming up at that point.
What do you remember about the state of things when you started at Fairness in terms of like legal protections and also cultural acceptance and belonging for LGBTQ people?
I felt that we were at a place where it was the base level, and we were going to keep on moving up and forward from there. And I felt like that happened for quite a while. I started at the beginning of the Obama administration, President Obama, at that point, the most LGBTQ friendly and focused policy-wise president that we had had. And so still, though, not a lot of states with LGBTQ marriage around 2009. I mean, like 4 or 5, if my memory serves, and that's at the end of 2009, not at the beginning of 2009. And we still don't have the Matthew Shepard and James T. Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. We've just been talking about the tragic murder of Matthew Shepard, an obvious hate crime. We didn't have federal hate crime protections until 2010. President Obama hasn't even ended Don't Ask, Don't Tell at that point in time. So while I felt like we were at a base level, I did feel like the base level was like pretty base. Like, okay, like we're getting to a place. We still didn't have discrimination protections in the vast majority of Kentucky, but guess what? Of course, 25 years later, we still don't have discrimination protections across the Commonwealth. But we saw steady progress. We saw the movement building, and we really got kicking on that statewide work. We have these successes in smaller communities like the Appalachian coal town of Vico, which became really famous. Population 334 with an openly gay mayor, also the town hairdresser. Everybody knows and remembers Mayor Johnny Cummins. But, that shifted a narrative, not just statewide, but also it caught a lot of fire nationwide, and not the least of which thanks go to Stephen Colbert for running a really sublime piece on the Colbert Report that launched that story all across the world to say that LGBTQ people live literally everywhere. We're everywhere. We always have been. And that became the smallest city in all of America with an ordinance that protects LGBTQ folks from discrimination. And then we see Frankfurt and Moorhead and on and on and on. And we build that progress. And then, of course, now we look at, the base level where I thought we were. I mean, certainly things are substantially better in so many areas. We've got marriage, 10 years of marriage equality across the United States. That's nothing small. We've got about 30% of the state protected with LGBTQ fairness ordinances around the Commonwealth. Arguably, we've got workplace discrimination protections thanks to the Supreme Court all across America. Now, all of that is substantial, but we look at what's happening with the trans community now, and we look at the ways that the attacks are relentless in state houses all across the United States, but here in the Kentucky Capitol as well, where we had stopped pretty much every anti-LGBTQ bill for nearly a decade. And then this anti-trans rhetoric starts sweeping the nation for political purposes, and we've ended up here where we are, which I argue is so much worse than the base level where we started when I got hired in 2009.
It feels so much more complicated.
It's more insidious. It's more mean-spirited than it was, it feels. And I don't know entirely what to attribute that to, except that we saw that across the board on civil rights. We certainly have seen it with racism in America, where, it was kind of a quiet, passive racism that was always the undercurrent, I feel, in our country. And then suddenly it was like, well, whew, glad we can get those hoods off so we can finally breathe now. And I think that really ignited this firestorm of, well, everything is fair play. And because the trans community in particular is so small, and because while the vast majority of Americans have an LGB person in their lives that they love and accept and support, at least to some degree, the vast majority of Americans probably still don't have a trans person in their inner circle. And that lack of familiarity led to the ability of the far right, who lost the marriage issue a decade ago. That was a key wedge issue for political gain, and said, what's next? And first they tried attacking the trans community with bathroom laws, which failed in North Carolina, and corporate America took a big stand. But that bravery has waned would actually be, an understatement. The way that we've seen, the sports issue that they found in polling and focus groups played the best was where they got their hook in, and then it was just all red meat from there for the other side to create all sorts of lies and myths and mistruths about the trans community. And at the root of all of it is controlling the gender narrative, because at the root of all of it is still sort of a patriarchal desire to control women's spaces, to control women's bodies, to control what is gender. And that's what we're seeing the trend now in the laws. And because that's something that the gender binary is such an intrinsic belief for so many folks, I think it is triggering whatever it is that's making it so much more mean. And that's the trend, unfortunately, that we're going to continue to see, but it's reaching a fever pitch and people are not going to tolerate it.
That sounds very optimistic.
Does it sound optimistic? Does it sound firm? Because
well, it does. And a lot of what I hear you say publicly sounds very optimistic. Is it sometimes a self-pep talk?
No, it's always a 1,000-year view. Mm-hmm. I think about living this life as impacting far beyond it for all of us. All the decisions that we're going to make are reverberating for generations. And we are winning. It's why we're under attack. They wouldn't be fighting us this hard if LGBTQ rights, if racial diversity, if anti-racism weren't on the rise. That's what's on the rise. The noise of the other side is also on the rise, but the other side, I don't believe, at the heart of it, is on the rise. And this is just the rubber band in the slingshot getting pulled back right now. It's painful. There's tension. We're being pulled. But when we build the right momentum and get released, it's going to catapult us forward in ways that we couldn't imagine. 100 years from now, even 50 years from now, in our lifetimes, it will be different.
Do you see your work as active or reactive or a combination of those things?
Because I know a lot of times
when you're in the news, it's usually in reaction to something that's going on that you need to speak out against. But what would you and the Fairness Campaign be doing if you didn't have to constantly respond to things and you could kind of set your own agenda?
Building joy, community, which is what we are doing in the midst of all of it. We'd focus all of our efforts in that direction. The way that Pride has proliferated all across the Commonwealth. When I started, there were 2 Pride festivals. It was the Kentuckiana Pride Festival, and Lexington Pride Festival was only in its 2nd year. And now there are 30 plus local Pride festivals all across the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And, that's what's at the heart of drag bans as well, which we faced multiple times in Frankfurt. And, is another thing about policing gender in a way. But drag bans are intended to quash community, to stop us from gathering joyfully, which is what Pride festivals are. Pride brings folks out like nothing I've ever seen. And it doesn't matter which Pride you're at, whether you're at Louisville, Kentuckiana, Lexington, Pikeville, Augusta, London Pride, Paducah Pride, Frankfurt Pride, all of them across the state have massive support because people are hungry for community.
We're listening to a conversation between Fairness Campaign Executive Director Chris Hartman and Laura Ellis from the On Track production team. We'll be back with more after the break. You're on track with Louisville Public Media. Welcome back to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and as part of LPM's 75th anniversary, we're sharing the stories of people who've helped shape this city. Today, to help kick off Pride Month, LPM's Laura Ellis talks with Fairness Campaign Executive Director Chris Hartman about his work in LGBTQ advocacy.
It's such a weird moment right now because of the state of things nationally. Some people are leaving red states, and I'm sure this has been happening forever. Yeah. I mean, we remember before there was marriage equality, it was like a checkerboard situation of some states you could and some states you couldn't. And then what if you get married in one state, move to another state? Is it still legal. I remember we had that weird moment where you could get married but not divorced. Remember that? So, like, we've been through this. We've been through this sort of state-based assemblage of rights. And as I'm hearing people think about what kind of place is Kentucky for a queer person to live, and everyone kind of comes to their own conclusions about whether to stay or leave.
It hurts my heart because I can never blame anybody for going. I have several compounding privileges that give me the opportunity to stay, and I know not every family has the privilege of making those choices. For folks that need to protect their trans kids, many of them have had to leave so that they can at least get the medical care that they need. But while a patchwork of rights exists right now, if the federal politics and Congress and President Trump continue to be able to grow power unchecked, it won't be a patchwork any longer. It will be a country that has denied unilaterally LGBTQ, but very specifically trans rights. So at a point, there won't be escaping if we don't fight back and unify in a way that stops the hemorrhaging that we're experiencing right now of trans rights, LGBTQ rights, anti-racism, the DEI attacks, all of this is implicitly interconnected. And it hurts me so much, though, again, I completely understand it for folks who leave, because if everybody leaves, we'll never change the state. The state can change. This state can change. The values of this state are so much better than the people who are elected to represent it right now. And I believe in my heart that that is true of every state in America. But there are some states that have the ability to turn the ship around. And it's not a fast turn, right? The Titanic iceberg, no time. It's going to take a minute, right? But Kentucky can turn back. And we do that election after election by chipping away in the state house, state representatives, state senators, and that's where we're going to be able to finally turn this around. Is it going to happen next year? Absolutely not. Will it happen in 5 years? Not entirely, but we could be moving in the right direction. Could definitely happen in a decade.
With your level of experience and expertise that you're at now, you could have used your position with fairness to catapult into so many different things, in so many different places and careers and probably income brackets. What has kept you from doing that?
I get asked this a lot. And honestly, I did consider doing something else. Really, 6 years, when I was hitting about the 10-year mark, we were just coming to the end of the Obama years. Things were feeling like, we've had marriage equality for a few years. And it was feeling like, yeah, I could keep doing this. It would be fun. It would be great. But it's feeling like we've accomplished a lot, and then boom, right? All of a sudden, the shift. And it's important to fight right now, anybody who has the ability to do it, in whatever capacity and in whichever place. For us, our lane is really the state capitol and local elections, local laws. For the HRC, for the Equality Federation, for the Trevor Project, helping lead the battle at the federal level and with all the states also supporting. It feels like right now that in this moment, if you have the ability to push back in an official way, in an unofficial way, and you aren't doing it in every way that you can, it feels like you're not doing enough. And so for me personally, until we get to a place that is at least back to some base level where we're not constantly under attack, where the trans community is not in the crosshairs of every single political ad, it feels important to continue to work and to build and grow, and hopefully to continue to grow the fairness campaign.
Do you think that 2020 changed things in activism, both the protests and COVID-19 and the response?
Yes. Of course. Now, can I enumerate all the different ways I think it has changed things? I don't know. But locally, undeniably, the murder of Breonna Taylor is a wound that will never heal in our community. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be festering a little bit, and sometimes a lot of it. There were times we could have been louder. There were times we could have been more out there in the protests against the murder of Breonna Taylor. I mean, we were out there. Certainly I did get tear gassed along with other folks, but there were people who were on the front line all the time, every day, for more than 365 days. And so, yes, it definitely changed things because I think it forced folks to start thinking about the fact that they couldn't sit in the middle. There was an expectation of organizations and individuals to let your voice be heard and to let your views be known in some way around that time. And the places where there were silence, that spoke volumes.
What do you make of all the DEI rollbacks?
I mean, it's just the next thing, right? It's just the next way for folks with white privilege to say it doesn't exist and to point the finger and say, you're being racist. And that knee-jerk reaction is just what kills me because folks just aren't listening. They're just not listening to the lived experiences of every black person you have ever known who has more than one, more than five, more than a dozen distinct stories to share in their lives where they were denied something, where they were treated less than, or where they were outright discriminated against because of the color of their skin. And for many LGBTQ folks, obviously the same. But to not acknowledge that and to say that not everybody is starting from the same place, we just aren't. Naturally, we aren't. This idea that everybody has an absolutely equal opportunity to rise. And I recognize that a lot of white folks are lacking a lot of the privileges to succeed as well. Poverty is real. Disability is real. And so that crosses racial line. LGBTQ folks, we are in every community, every color. But to just not acknowledge that folks do need additional support who have been historically marginalized, and to not take that personally. Yeah, that's 100% what I'm seeing with the DEI. So, I mean, and you saw how deeply it was hurting folks on the floor, like Senator Gerald Neal had a really impassioned moment. Other folks, I know Senator Katura Herron, impacted deeply by this legislation, and the other side just kind of, we got to do it. We just got to do it.
Well, I mean, and that reminds me of Senator Berg, too.
Yeah.
Just the sort of personal nature of things on one side.
To pass Senate Bill 150, arguably the worst anti-trans law in the entire country in 2023, weeks after Senator Berg's son, Henry, a trans activist who worked with the Fairness Campaign for many years, completed suicide, was unconscionable. And it should always be a stain on their souls that they did it in front of her. She sometimes would break down in the committee hearings and give impassioned speeches that spoke not just to reason and logic, but to the grief of a mother. There's so many shameful things that the Kentucky General Assembly has done through the years, and probably look back through lots and lots of years, but I'd say that in the soul of the body, there are few marks more significant than that. In many ways, it was seeing Senator Berg's grief that, I'd spent the first 14, 15 legislative sessions being exceptionally respectful to every committee that I was ever before. And also, let me be clear, there were very few committees that I had to testify before the past 5 years. There were very few anti-LGBTQ bills that ever received committee hearings, certainly much less became law. But in 2023, I had to testify more times than every previous legislative session. I had served as a lobbyist for 13, whatever it was, legislative sessions combined. And in many ways, it was seeing Senator Berg's grief as the Senate Education Committee was first hearing Senate Bill 150, which was originally about education, about pronouns in schools, and then ultimately became this monster of a bill. But that was the year that I recognized that sometimes we're not talking to these lawmakers, we're talking to the trans kids at home and their families who are watching, because they need to see that people are willing to put it all on the line for them, because people don't deserve this treatment. And that was what Senator Berg's grief, I think, showed so many of us that legislative session. The 2023 Kentucky General Assembly is like a battle wound that won't heal for all of us.
I mean, I guess this brings me to probably what my biggest question is for you, and that is, how do you keep doing this?
Because we have to. I mean, there's not another option. I want the world to be a better place. I would love to get to play video games all day or go sit on a beach all day and feel like we are at peace in the world. That would be great. But until such time, that is a fantasy, not a reality. It could be a reality in the future. But knowing that we can make a difference, or that we're trying to make a difference, because the effort is what counts. The effort is what counts. And this is what, when I started at Fairness, when we were kind of losing a lot of the local fairness ordinances, either votes or not even getting to a vote, it's failing forward. You've got to fail forward. How we lose matters. And that's what 2023 felt like in the General Assembly. It felt like how we lose this year matters. Are we going to go down fighting, or are we going to be politic about it? Maintain decorum. We've just got to say it plainly, communicate it to our base so that they understand how bad it all is right now. And we've got to do it with passion.
Chris Hartman has been the executive director of Kentucky's Fairness Campaign since 2009. He spoke with LPM's director of podcast and special projects, Laura Ellis. Their conversation is part of our project, 75 and Change, telling the stories of changemakers in our community. On Track is a production of Louisville Public Media. The On Track production team includes Michelle Tyreen Johnson, Alex Biscardi, and Laura Ellis. Our music is by Kojin Tashiro. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and remember to stay loud, stay proud, don't hide that pride. Until next time, you're on track with the Louisville Public Media.